if something's coming through, regardless of the frequency, it needs to be something that's intentional and musical and not something that was just a byproduct of the physicality of making that sound.
Oh, it's a good rant. I like this.
That was a good rant.
Thank you, Carl.
Yeah, we're gonna chop that one up for the gram.
Yeah.
Hi, Ben.
Hi, Carl.
We're back.
It's good to see you after 50 seconds. It wasn't even 50 seconds. This was like 30 seconds of.
It was a week, Ben.
Of not seeing you.
Don't break the fourth wall. It was a whole week.
It was a whole week. I'm wearing the same shirt, and you're.
Oh crap!
And you're wearing the same hat, and they match. And they match.
We should have done a wardrobe change. We should have pulled a Lady Gaga.
I like. You know what? I want our listeners to know how cringe we are, and if they don't appreciate that about us, then that's their problem.
Yes. Like, and I feel like my children, if they heard you say the word cringe, they would confirm that,
listen,
man with beard saying cringe is indeed cringe.
Yeah, I ain't gonna hide my age. I'm 38. I don't even try to be cool. So,
you young buck. I just hit the big 4-0.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thanks. I survived. I have all my fingers and toes. That's a miracle.
Amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's this new artist I've been listening to a lot recently. Not new. He's not new. It's called Bahamas. And it's amazing. I'm super into it. It's like I've discovered like my favorite new musician in a really long time. Like I haven't had like a even though I'm Jewish, I'm going to say this, come to Jesus moment with an artist in a while like this. This is good stuff. Carl is face palm. This is the best moment of Secret Sonics of all time.
Oh, that was lovely.
Yeah. I'm just taking that. I'm taking that from other podcasts, not even from obviously not from the church.
Yeah. We should make this episode titled "Jew Comes to Jesus," and then just no context or subtitle. Anyway, that's awesome. And you know how.
But he has a song called "Not Cool Anymore," which I clearly am not cool anymore. I clearly am not cool anymore. Yeah, I used to be cool. That's great. Oh, I love that. That's great. For the listeners, Carl is holding up a flag that says "I used to be cool," and it looks like high school or something.
It's like a little pennant flag. Yeah.
I love it.
I got this a couple years ago at this like cool little shop downtown here, and I just haven't found a good place to hang it yet. But I brought it back over from the studio, and I want to hang it up somewhere. But anywho,
I do like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I love
Anyways, we're not cool anymore. But let's get into it.
Yes. So, before we forgot our wardrobe change, we were talking about bass and how our different approaches to bass, and we've ended up kind of spending more time just talking about production and like the internal wranglings of how to get the bass to sound good and feel good and work for the song. But we didn't really get too much into how we approach it in the mix and how we get the bass to feel great with the other instruments to like really fit in the bigger context of the song. I think I left the last episode talking about the trying to wrangle the electric bass when it's combined with a sub bass, like with a synth bass.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the first, like the beginnings of talking about how to get these to play well with others. But I want to toss it to you, and I want to hear your approach to actually getting the bass to feel good in the mix and like in the greater context of the song. So what is your like mentality towards getting the bass to feel right for the song?
Yeah, I don't think I overthink this at all. I'm going to maybe give you like a really boring answer, but it's just about balance. Like what's the level of the bass compared to the vocal and the kick drum? Especially like kick, bass, vocal, getting that stuff to really be at the right levels from one to the other is really about getting the bass to feel good in the context of a song. And so I think we spoke about this even on the drum episode of like, getting the bass and the drum and the kick drum like sort of locked in with the vocal, and then you can kind of bring everything else up around it. I think that's the most important thing for making things feel good. Specifically, like on a frequency level, getting the kick and bass to lock in a nice way that they're sort of overlapping, but they have each other's, but they give each other space is obviously really important. And it's like, I know it's like, duh, everyone does that. And so, whether you're side chaining or EQing, I usually just do EQ, but sometimes I'll do like dynamic EQ and I'll sidechain the dynamic EQ to the kick.
Mhm.
So I'll like I don't know, 100 hertz and down on the bass. There'll be like a shelf, and it'll get like sidechained by the kick drum to give the kick a little bit more space. That's something that I'll do sometimes. Um, Generally speaking, though, I usually like to have my kicks more subby and my bass more bassy, and there's a good reason for that. And I think it has to do with what you were talking about, also with like the when you were talking about the 808s or those sub basses, getting them to really match. I feel like having a consistent kick drum that hits that sub frequency just right every single time is like an easier way to get it done than to have the bass take care of that. And it's actually easier for the bass to live in the range where you're actually playing, because like the fundamental the E string on a bass is 80 hertz. So 80 hertz is not really sub department. I mean, it's approaching sub department, but it's not. Um, so like getting the bass to be where it is really seems to work a little bit better for me, like getting 80, 100 hertz in the bass sort of locked in. Whereas
Yeah.
in the kick drum, it might occupy closer to 60 or 40 hertz, giving it more of that fundamental sub. So generally, that's kind of the breakdown I usually do. I'm not against giving the bass the sub, but generally it works easier for the bass to have, because I'm using like electric bass and not like sub bass.
I'm gonna fight you real quick because I was like, and maybe we can edit this out because
You
you're
can
the
fight me.
bassist.
Come on,
But I
let's
was
go.
like,
Put up
that
your
doesn't seem
dukes.
right to me. Like
Really?
80 seems really high to me, and I googled it real quick, and it's 41.2.
Really?
So
On an
yeah,
electric bass?
hmm
Is Google sure about this? Because
I was like, is that?
because 440. Okay, what is the fundamental of a bass guitar E? Really? It says 41 hertz. No shit. Okay, I take everything back. I suck.
What? But here it's like, oh, wait, actually, you know, here it is. Okay, so supposedly, when you play the low E, the pitch you actually hear is the 82, which is an octave. It's the first harmonic.
Oh,
So like you perceive the 82, but you feel the 41.
huh.
So I don't know if you want to go back and like tweak what we were saying.
No, let's leave this in as it is. I'm learning, and people should know that we're humans and we learn.
Yeah, yeah, because
But
as
that's cool.
yeah, well, especially because I'm like I am not a. I'll be the first person to tell you I am not like a a, a numbers guy for recording. Like I am so bad at remembering like a lot of these specifics. I remember A440 obviously, and I'm like a crazy person for tempo, for like BPMs. But when it comes to this, I was like, it sounded it didn't sound right 'cause I felt like low E's on bass can get so much more full. So I guess it does make sense that the first harmonic is in like, in the 80-ish range, 82, I think it was, something like that. Um, so anyway, sorry, that was our little sidebar. We're
Okay, it could be.
learning
Yeah, it
as we
could be.
go.
I'm gonna keep looking into this, but
Yeah.
I was pretty sure it was 80. But I mean, 80 is what I hear.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So anyways, so maybe someone in the audience can help us out here. But
Yes.
yeah, but generally speaking, the bass feels really good in the 80 hertz to 120 hertz range, and the kick drum can feel good with like a lower sub area and less of that kind of punchy 100 area. And that's sort of the usual breakdown of the bass and the kick for me. But it doesn't always happen that way. It's just something that tends to work.
Yep. And I end up typically doing kind of the opposite.
Yeah,
Well,
come
because
on, tell me.
when it's synth bass, especially like the bottom end is way low and like really consistent, way lower. And I want the kick to like for my kicks, because again, I'm using 99% of the time they're electronic kicks or like they're samples, right? So way more consistent, way more predictable. as far as like the any kind of dynamic variation and things. So I tend to do a a high pass at like 6 dB per octave from like 32 or 33 hertz. And this is actually per the suggestion of friend of the show, Nick DeLorenzo, because I think I might have mentioned this before, where it was something where I was getting feedback from him like for a bunch of mixes in a row that I was having like too much like super low sub in the kick. And I started doing this on my kick buses, and it's just like I did 99 times out of 100, like it makes the kick better, and it makes the kick a little bit more controlled and allows it to have just like the punch that I want, but then getting out of the way for the big bottom of the synth. So I can sidechain it, and I'm not worried about the frequencies clashing. It's more of like a volume envelope sort of
Mm,
sidechain. So that way when the kick's hitting, the bass is like just moving a bit out of the way for that little moment in time. But then otherwise, like the bass is giving that big full consistency.
yeah.
And it's not that it's right or wrong. I think it's just kind of coincidentally for a lot of the styles of music that I'm working on, um, when it's that when it's more of like that vibe. Um, but I
Yeah.
think also, from a an emotional standpoint and from like a arrangement and dynamic standpoint, I think that works because a lot of times if I do have electric bass and synth bass, usually the tones tend to change from verse to chorus. So maybe the verse doesn't have the synth bass in it, or maybe it has like just a respace or something, and like the actual like big subs don't come into the chorus. So doing it that way, where I have the bass really filling up like the bottom extremes of the mix, the
Mm,
kick can be going the whole time, but then it feels like when the chorus comes in, like it feels like the frequency range like expands
yeah.
downward. So then it,
Uh-huh.
it feels like it gets bigger,
Mhm.
as opposed to having the kick being like carrying that really extreme bottom weight and having that go through the song. Then the bass doesn't really like elevate the the chorus as much. So even in that case, I would probably end up doing some sort of, high pass on the kick for the verses, so that way the bottom end of the kick gets a little bit, more bigger in the
Yeah.
choruses. But I think that's kind of like maybe I'm having the realization right now of why I tend to have the bass uh, carry the very bottom extreme, and I think it's because it gives me a more impactful dynamic
Chorus.
range for the
Yeah.
bottom end from section to section of the song.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's not something I do, and
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
it's a
I mean,
totally different
well, it's
style. Yeah.
yeah. I don't work on songs that usually need that. Although, like, I will, I'll like enhance a kick drum when we get to a chorus, and it could even just be for the first kick drum, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'll add an extra sub boom to that first kick, you know,
Yeah.
at the chorus. So it's just like you feel like, oh, now we're in a big section. But then the bass and the kick might go back to what they're usually doing, or it may just raise the level of the kick drum and the bass there.
Yeah.
So there's always the volume knob that's also very effective. But
Yeah.
that's really cool, and
Yeah.
I want to experiment with that also. So thanks
Yeah.
for sharing.
Also, I've been another big thing that I've been doing that's been really, really helpful, especially when I'm managing multiple layers of bass, and especially if it changes from section to section. The low end focus module, or like the standalone plugin, whatever, in Ozone 11 is so good at trying to kind of like it's almost like a volume rider for specific frequencies. So having that on my bus that all of the bases that I'm going to helps me to kind of keep it more consistent if I want to, or maybe make it even more drastic if I want to make it more drastic, which is nice. But it's a way for me to control that in a way that, you know, most regular compressors just don't quite do. Especially if I want to keep the low end controlled without a big bottom coming in, and then that's compressing the entire frequency range, and then all of the cool texture that I was creating in the electric bass, like the chorus and the distortion, whatever it is, instead of that getting brought down because of the compressor, it's allowing that to stay untouched and really just focusing on getting the bottom end to,
Right.
not go crazy on my, tape sim on the mix bus, or like the compressors, or the,
Got
the
it.
limiter at the end.
You're kind of using it like a multi-band compressor almost.
Yeah. Yeah. But just with a little bit more, I don't know. I think it's a little bit more specialty to
Yeah.
that. I
Cool.
found, it just works
Sick.
way better than anything else I've used so far.
Yeah. I find like the multi-bands don't usually work for me, but I think it's also because I'm usually working on real bass that I've
Yeah.
played myself and I've played consistently. And so for me, it's just not the right fit.
Totally. Totally.
But it could be in the right context of the right, production.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all obviously, like, I think I don't think we've like explicitly said it, but I hope that our listeners are smart enough to know that none of these things are hard and fast rules. Like, these are just,
Yeah.
they're all context dependent, but they're like based
Hmm.
on the kind of stuff that we're working on, and like I think we're doing a pretty good job of trying to like give that context.
Totally.
That's, the things that work for me are probably not going to work for Ben, and things that work for Ben are probably not going to work for me. And anybody telling you that there's one way to do it or one way to not do it is, full of shit, or
Absolutely.
doesn't listen to enough music to know that there's
Yeah.
a lot of different ways to do it.
But also, I want to just like highlight the thing about like high passing things is
Yeah.
I think that's like really underrated for low, instruments that are in subharmonic territory because you probably can't even hear it. So you're more likely than not making a mess down there, especially if you can't hear. It's like I don't hear much but below 40 in my room. So probably better that it's a good thing that it's going to a mastering engineer to kind of make sure. But like, yeah, filtering out the bottom of those kicks is probably a good idea.
I mean, it's just that I think especially for I think that the two places that could be really helpful would be like for the stuff that I'm doing where it's usually sample based. Pretty much every sample, or not every sample, but like most samples you get on Splice, or anywhere like any sort of place like that, they're so overhyped. They're a huge frequency range. There's like really big transient, a lot of bottom. Like, there's usually too much of something. There's usually too much of like a couple different things.
Yeah.
So sometimes we need that really huge bottom, but usually we don't. And it's going to be different than when you're recording real kick. But usually in real kick, you're trying to get a bunch of, trying to like emphasize the bass frequencies, like the sub frequencies. You're trying to emphasize that, make that feel bigger, because a lot of times like the actual mic doesn't really sound like that when you just hit play untouched. But when
Totally.
you're adding that, you're doing the compression, and you're also not just getting the sound from the kick itself, but you're also getting like the physical vibrations from your foot hitting the kick pedal hitting the head. Like, there are these other really low frequencies that are coming through that are not necessarily musical. It just like with hi-hats, like that's why there's usually a weirdly huge amount of sub frequencies in a hi-hat track. Not because the hi-hats have a bunch of low end when you hit them themselves, but it's because the physical vibration of the stick hitting the hi-hat, moving the entire hi-hat stand, rumbling through the floor, going over uh to the mic stand. So it's like you have these, they're not musical rumbles, but they are still physical manifestations of the action that you took, that we need to try to take out, because it's not just removing rumble to remove rumble. It's not just doing a high pass because you're supposed to do a high pass. It's just trying to listen through and make sure that if something's coming through, regardless of the frequency, it needs to be something that's intentional and musical, and not something that was just a byproduct of the physicality of making that sound.
Oh, it's a good rant. I like
That was
this.
a good rant.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Carl.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
gonna chop that one up for the gram.
Yeah.
Um,
Hell yeah.
yeah.
Sweet. So what else do you do to kind of get the bass feeling nice in the context of like, I don't know, you could say either a drum kit or the mix or something?
Well, usually, I mean, sidechaining almost always helps. I tend to also sidechain not just to the kick, but also to the snare because if I am working on a style of music, well, I'll say this. If it's like a four on the floor kind of like dancey track, I usually don't need to sidechain it to the snare because the snare is hitting when the kick's hitting. So there's usually not a lot of low end in the snare because we don't need a lot of low end in the snare when it's happening in unison with the kick. And also, like the snare wouldn't be triggering any new rhythms. It would just be like doubling up what the kick sidechain's doing. So that's not, pardon me. So that's not necessary. But in stuff where it's more like rock based, almost like rock rhythms versus dance rhythms, if you think of it that way. Um, a lot of times, like the snares have a lot of bottom for the stuff that I work on. So I also want to make sure that I'm not neutering the snare sound just so that it doesn't fight the bass. I would rather get the bass out of the way for that little moment, let the snare have its, couple milliseconds of bottom end rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater and
Yeah.
getting rid of the bottom end of the snare just so the bass can cut through better, like for that one little tiny itty bitty moment.
When you're sidechaining, are you usually just sidechaining the whole volume, or are you like focusing on the bass frequencies?
Typically the whole thing, usually. But it's usually very quick. And I usually use either like a kickstart or something like that where it's like a volume envelope and it's a lot more controlled and like more controllable as opposed to like a traditional like compression side chain. So it's
Yeah.
more like triggered versus like the release time of the kick affects or like the decay of the kick affects how slow the release is of the side chain. So it usually ends up being just very fast. So I can use it. It can go pretty deep and you don't even notice it. Like that's really the goal. Like with the sidechain stuff, like there's the like there's two ways you can use it. Especially when you're dealing with the bass, you can do it in a way that is creative, where you're going with like the classic like Daft Punk, getting everything to completely duck out, and that pumping is part of the creative experience of the song.
Hmm.
Or you can use it, which is more how I tend to use it in the mixing context, where it's more of like a utility, where it's just like when you're using the sidechain, like multiband, or you're doing something like that, where
Yeah.
you're just
Yeah.
trying to be transparent with it. You're just making sure that you're not
Overloading
you're not
everything.
overloading things,
Yeah. And
like
masking. Yeah.
yeah, like so
Hmm.
if you're doing it well, you don't even notice that it's there until you bypass it, and then
Yeah.
everything starts to like get too crunchy and bloated and
And
fart.
mushy. Yeah. And you lose
Yeah,
your focus.
yeah,
Yeah. I dig it. I dig it. Yeah. There's definitely genres of music that are created around sidechaining. I'm thinking of like future bass and stuff.
yeah,
So yeah. Awesome.
yeah.
Anything else that we should share before we wrap this episode? I know you got to go soon.
So I know these are both short episodes, but I'm glad that we got deep into them. I think it was
Yeah.
it was very rapid,
Yeah.
rapid
These are
fire.
two rapid episodes because we ran out of episodes.
It's
But
it's the time. It's a
it's the
crazy
time of the
season of
season.
life. It's a season of
Yeah.
life, and we would rather. Yeah,
I'll take the blame here because of like various random Jewish holidays. But um I do want to say, like, before we wrap this, just like I forgot to talk about like in the mixing, like getting the maybe we spoke about this a little bit in the drum episode of just like saturation and combining things together and like stuff like the black box and tape emulations and that kind of stuff that kind of really often glues the drums with the bass really nicely together, and gives the bass that extra depth and makes it feel cohesive in the track. So I just want to put that out there also. That's also a big part of what I'm doing,
yeah,
and that also helps kind of make it all gel and feel good together. So that's
yeah.
it. That's just a quick little rant.
No, that's great. And I feel like I've actually had a harder time getting Black Box to work on my like my overall bass bus. Like I have sub buses for my electric bass tracks and my like synth bass tracks, and then they both go to like kind of like a master bass bus, and then that goes off to my mix bus. So I've had better luck with Black Box, for example, putting it on just the electric bass bus or just like the synth bass bus. Because when I tend to, what I found is that like when I put it on like all the bases as a whole, in the way that I would with the isotope low end focus, where I'm intentionally putting it there to try to help everything kind of stay more consistent. When I use black box or any kind of saturation like that, I've just found it impossible for me to take steps forward without also taking steps backward.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I'm not much
Yeah.
less frequently using synth bass and real bass together.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm just putting it on the bass.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I
Yeah.
was going to say is like
Yeah.
me putting it on like my electric bass bus can sound amazing. Me putting it on this like the synth bass bus can sound amazing, but I've found that I need to like kind of uh I was like compartmentalize it or get more
Yeah.
granular with it than I normally would do. Because I love doing late in the mix chain as I possibly can. That's where I want to do my decisions. I want to try to only make things as surgical as I am required to because of the nature of what I'm trying to fix. Like if I can make a big picture, I want to make a big picture. And this is just one thing, like the saturation, and like the any kind of like tube stuff that has the potential of getting farty and mushy in the bottom end. Like I need to have more specific control because of
For sure.
what's coming out of the synth bass bus is just fundamentally so different than what's coming out
Yeah,
of the
because when you're
electric bass
combining
bus.
stuff, these plugins react to like the culmination of all those things, and then you might have to
Yeah.
strip things back earlier in the chain if you're not
Yeah.
careful. So you really do need to be careful.
Yeah.
I feel like we could even go deeper on this, but we're out of time.
I know. I'm
Can I
at the
do like
stage, but
one Pensado's place question for you, like batter's box? Okay,
yes.
electric bass, go to compressor, go.
I know. I think I'm just like watching the pitches fly by me. Um, I would either say the BrainWorks Townhouse compressor, uh, Eventide Omnipressor, or usually this is like a not an, a. I hope this is not a cop out answer. I'd probably go for an amp sim before I went for a compressor. I'd probably like you get an amp sim to do its thing because even I'm thinking about it now and like even then I usually use a Townhouse or an Omnipressor after an amp sim.
And that's usually the Corey Wong Amsim.
Usually.
Cool.
I guess, I mean, for some stuff, I have the Nolly
Oh
sim
yeah.
as well from the Rode DSP. So it depends on like what's the style. Like, am I going for real fucking high gain or am I going for something that's meant to be just more of a transparency? Because I really do like the compression, like just not necessarily even like the compressor pedal part of the Corey Wong amp sim, but I think just going through an amp compresses the bass in a way that ends up feeling more natural. So if I want it to sound natural, that's what I'm going to do. Otherwise, if I'm trying to like really like intentionally fuck it up, then I'm going to go ham and intentionally fuck it up.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I like it.
What
Good
about okay,
answer.
real quick, right back at you.
uh,
What's your go-to?
I do like I'm really into the in the virtual mix rack from Slate. Maybe it's like a CL1B or something. It's like their deluxe optical compressor, and it's really really good. And I use that also on vocals a lot, and they have like different. There's like a warm and a punchy and like a different versions of it. But I use like the straight up like the natural one on the bass, and it just like glues it and slams it, and it keeps the punch. So I really like that one. That's like my go
Yeah,
to these days. Usually,
awesome.
yeah, not always, but usually,
Yeah.
yeah, depends. Okay, hold
Okay.
on.
So real quick for Gavi, I know I have to chat a second, but so I was thinking maybe we should take the batter's box thing and just move it a little bit earlier, like kind of before we started our goodbyes. Because we kind of started wrapping it, and then we were like, "Oh wait, batter's box thing." So maybe we should just fly that a little earlier. Maybe.
Um, I think we could leave it as is.
Okay. I'll say like yeah, you guys use your judgment. But um, Ben, you're the man. Thank you for sharing your wonderful knowledge and experience and insight. And I am
Likewise,
just
Carl. This is fun.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I think we're going to just keep going into these nerdy episodes. We'll have a season of nerdiness for the listeners. I think they might like it.
Yeah. This has been weirdly fun. I usually don't get nerdy about stuff, and
That's
I
why I'm
don't
here.
know.
I'm here to help you get nerdy, Carl.
Yeah. It's like tickling a little part of my brain I don't usually talk about.
Yeah, totally. Awesome.
Ben,
Well,
you're awesome.
you're awesome, Carl.
No, I said you're awesome.
Thanks.
E. All right. Bye, Ben.
Bye, Carl. We're such like goofy people.
Yes.
Okay, I'm ending this.